it's showing up now in research and why it didn't before. A couple, basically 2 points, and I'll stop, inshallah. The dominant narrative has been about immigrant success and written by immigrants about immigrants. And what we often do, and I teach social work at Howard University in Washington, D.C., we can look at research and what results it produces. So 2 points about research. Number one, when you go to do research, you have to recruit a sample, a group of people who will respond to your surveys. Typically speaking, communities that are under-researched or difficult to reach because they're not accustomed to being the subjects of research, we use what's called snowball sampling. So I'll go to Sister Aisha and I'll say I'm doing some study on Muslims and I want to know all these questions. And then I'll say, well, do you know anyone else? Typically speaking, she will refer me to someone within her same socioeconomic status. So I'll end up going to someone else who's also similarly educated, similar income levels. And it has been that we have been basically creating a snowball, right? That starts with 1 or 2 people, and then you keep asking the same question, and then they refer you to their own friend circle. That's one. Number two, which is something called social desirability bias. So in research, people who are being asked questions typically will try to answer in a way that they think the researcher will be happy with their answer. And that desirability bias is very typical, especially in face-to-face surveys. Only recently did we introduce telephone and online surveys, the research. So we actually did a lot of the phone calling that was done. You don't know who's on the other side. You just know that a question is being asked. You may feel more comfortable perhaps saying, well, this is our situation, this is our income level. Or in an online survey, when you have boxes to tick where you don't have a clue, you're not being faced with someone in person. That's the point about research. Number two, why poverty is not showing up. Number two, in 1965, the year after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 64, the American government overhauled immigration policy. But the immigration policy was very, very particular, very elitist, and very preferential in its scope. So it basically said, we will accept people now from Asia, North Africa, and other places that are already educated and higher education. So they were already doctors, lawyers, engineers, as Sister Petra mentioned. But then either they were established or they were going to come to get higher education. And so that group basically represented a fairly a pipeline, if you will, for education to higher income in a fairly robust way. So it replicated a lot of showing of high income folks. In the family reunification, what happened was that suppose my mom and dad, they actually couldn't convince any of our relatives to come from India because they were like, we have a good life, we're not coming. But if they convinced someone to come, their education level wasn't tested. Their education level wasn't looked upon in the policy because now this was someone's brother or sister being brought and they wanted to reunify families, so that was okay. They may not have come with the same levels of education and they might have ended up doing jobs that didn't pay nearly as much as their predecessors. So and then the second thing in 1990s, the diversity lottery visa was introduced by the US government, State Department particularly, to really think that they were diversifying predominantly where people were coming from and countries where immigration had not occurred from. So India and Pakistan, a lot of immigration occurred, but Bangladesh, for example, had not. So then suddenly the lottery visa and other countries as well basically said you apply it to the State Department, to your local embassy, and then sometime later you get a phone call or an email saying you've been approved. No education test, no language ability test. All these are mobility factors for immigrants who come in with English language readiness already or some kind of a career path in the making. So those two factors impacted. So the reality is poverty and possibly even extreme poverty actually do exist among Muslim Americans. We will not find that out until we actually do what will be what's called a mixed method survey, which is where you do the quantitative through the surveys, but you also sit and go through stories of people and actually interview them. And then they can say, well, we are medical doctors, for example, and we're well off, but our 3 other cousins just are struggling. They're struggling. They're making it, making just barely trying to make ends meet. So this is one of the reasons that we can deduce from the research of why poverty is not as commonly reported in the Muslim community. The last thing I want to say about this is that regrettably, there is also the tendency of folks who are new immigrants particularly to be very cautious of the government to know about their lives. So they may be coming from governments that have been dictatorial, who know your every move. So they, even if they had income, they prefer it to be cash or in-person exchange of money, where it's not really being reported. And so they may actually not be well off, and that may come across as a way to find out, but we will never know because a lot of it is not fully being reported. So that is a pattern that is not just common to Muslims, but immigrants generally, until they realize that, oh, it's not a problem. They know literally everything about me already, so what am I hiding or keeping from them, right? So this is just some thoughts, inshallah, on, and each panel was given about 5 to 7 minutes to respond, so don't think we're just going on and on and on. I was trying to do it within time, inshallah. So that's the initial thoughts, yeah.
And yeah, feel free to add anything to you. Sister Aisha, do you want to add? Sister Aisha, do you want to add anything to that or to this question?
No, I think.
Good.
Okay.
She's, by the way, the mayor of New York. That's how I refer to her. Yeah. Malcolm X, Allah yarhamhu, and others who died. Immigrant Muslims arrived and drove straight to the suburbs. They went past the quote-unquote inner cities and went straight to the suburbs, and we never looked back. And regrettably, even the idea of how long it took us to recognize that this was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's response, that we came to America. Dr. Suleiman Yang, who passed away last November, mentions this, that Allah yarhamhu, that we may be sitting here as immigrant Muslims in America because of the answer of the dua of an enslaved African, perhaps a man or a woman, who came from West Africa. 1 out of 4 of those enslaved were Muslims, and raised their hands in the fields of plantations of Georgia or Mississippi in the deep and said, "Oh Allah, they will not let me practice your religion, but replace me with someone in this land who will establish your religion, who will practice your religion." And it literally happened. 1964 Civil Rights Act gives rights to African Americans for the first time, and 65 the Immigration Act brings in immigrants, but we never quite saw that connection. And so now what's happening is, and I think Sister Aisha will talk about this, the work of Zahir Ali, for example, in Schaumburg and where you are in New York, that now we're having the children of not only immigrants but African Americans who are now saying that we grew up together, so we don't see a difference. And so now we can talk about that collective narrative, and we can undo some of those injustices whereby the example of the Prophet ﷺ was not followed. The people who were already here were the Ansar. They were the African American community, and they were in the exact model of the Ansar and the Muhajirin of the Quran. They were the people most knowledgeable about that land. The reason the Prophet ﷺ made the ukhuwah system of brotherhood and twinning people was that he said, some of you are from Mecca who have no clue how to raise crops. The Ansar are people who raise their business, their model is through the crops. So you will be twinned with this person, and you will go and learn from them, and you will go and inshallah make your livelihood after learning from them. We didn't do that. And because we didn't do that, in 2019, we're still struggling without political clout. We're still struggling without a position in society, despite how many compromises we've made to get this far. And the African American community, if we would have followed their model, they already had a successful model by 1940s in the form of Hajj Wali Akram, if you study his life, Allah yarhamhu, who already said that we have no choice but to follow the Constitution, but we will not compromise our Islamic principles to advance. And so he already knew we were going to vote, we were going to participate in the society fully, and we were the ones who were ambivalent about voting and blah blah blah, and it really affected us quite a bit. But I think that collaboration about Schaumburg and the other work that's being done in Brooklyn, inshallah, will be helpful if you want to start there.
Well,
and of course, when we compare our religious community to the other established religious communities in America, one of the challenges we face is that there's no central or even remotely central strategizing going on in terms of what institutions need to be invested in or developed. So literally, I could, sitting here, establish a 501c3 status for myself, call it Masjid Husain, because my last name, and then start screaming and shouting that you guys need to help build this masjid because we need it. And then you guys would be like, wait, what? Like there's literally a masjid like next door. Why are you building another masjid? No, a house of Allah. Like you should feel guilty for not supporting this masjid. And so this has been going on regrettably and detracting from work. And I'm associated with the ISPU as well as the Yaqeen Institute, and it's just phenomenal. The imagery of war and death and destruction evokes after a Jummah khutbah, somebody can raise $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in minutes that we struggle to raise for over several months to try to convince people to donate. So it can shift if you decide, if you who are listening and those to whom you can convey the message, that in fact the research that is now emerging from these institutes, particularly ISPU, is actually going to be the bedrock, the foundation of helping us to move forward in a very strategic way to establish those aspects of society that can nurture cradle to grave Muslim life. Like what will it take? Youth directors, for example, investment in their education, chaplains on campuses, investment in their training, and so on and so forth. How do we know that? By doing the research to find out that those are the needs that are there. Interracial and better improvement in interracial relations, that's going to be a big deal. Who is doing that research? How can we invest in that research to be able to find out how can we prevent our community from being what Martin Luther King said was that the Sunday morning was the most divided hour. It was the most divided hour in America by race because everybody went to their own churches by race. That's not too far off for Muslims. It's not too far off. Because if I can establish my masjid, so can you. And you might do it based along your racial and ethnic lines, and that's not helpful to anybody. So inshallah we're learning from this, but please do take it seriously when you see giving campaigns from ISPU and others who are think tanks working on this work, that you say, from my dollar of giving to the in donations, I will set aside this much for think tanks, this much for education, and so forth.